This 4-year-old girl helps a millionaire fix his Ferrari. When he looks at her face, he discovers something that shocks everyone. Comment. What you think will happen? Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The heavy rain lashed the streets of Harmony Creek that afternoon in March, when the unmistakable roar of an Italian engine echoed through the quiet suburban street. Theodore Ted Vasconcelos's gleaming red Ferrari, a prominent real estate developer in West Virginia, drew attention wherever it went. But at that moment, the 57-year-old businessman was experiencing something his money couldn't solve. The car simply stopped working in front of a modest diner. "Damn it!" Ted cursed, slamming his fist on the steering wheel in frustration. His $10,000 Italian suit was soaked, and his mood, which wasn't great to begin with, worsened with each failed attempt to start the engine. Across the street, sheltered by a small corrugated awning, a gray-haired woman watched the scene while arranging some homemade pies in a makeshift display case. Josephine, 68, knew rich folks like him well. They always sped by, never even noticing. Her little business. "Grandma, look at the pretty car," a sweet little voice exclaimed beside her. Lily, her 6-year-old granddaughter, pointed curiously at the red vehicle. The girl had large, expressive eyes and a peculiar crescent-shaped birthmark under her right eye that made her even more captivating. "Stay here, sweetie," Josephine pleaded. But before she could stop her, little Lily had already slipped out into the rain, running towards the imported car. Ted was on the phone with his personal mechanic when he heard tapping on the car window. Lowering the glass, he was met by a smiling little girl, completely drenched, but seemingly oblivious to the downpour. "Mister, do you need help?" she asked, tilting her head in a way that resembled a curious little bird. "No, thanks," he replied curtly, returning his attention to the phone. But the girl persisted. "My grandpa was a mechanic, you know. He always said that when a car stops like that, all of a sudden, it could be that part that looks like a heart," she explained, gesturing animatedly. Ted was about to dismiss her again when something stopped him. Maybe it was the girl's determined manner, or maybe it was just the desperation of being stuck there in the rain, but he found himself hanging up the phone and getting out of the car. "And where is this heart part located?" he asked, more out of politeness than truly believing a child could help. Lily ran to the front of the car, jumping gleefully in the puddles. "Open it up here, mister. I'll show you." Reluctantly, Ted activated the hood release. The girl stood on tiptoe, craning her neck to look at the engine. "There, see that little round thing?" she pointed out with conviction. To his complete surprise, Ted recognized that she was pointing exactly at the fuel pump. Years of dealing with luxury cars had given him a basic knowledge of mechanics, and he knew that could indeed be the problem. Following an intuition, he made some adjustments to the part, exactly as his own mechanic had once taught him. To his astonishment, when he returned to the driver's seat and turned the key, the engine roared to life and came back to life. It was at that moment, when he turned to thank his little helper, that Ted felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. The birthmark below the girl's right eye, that perfect crescent, was identical to the one his Antonia had. The businessman froze, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. For an instant, it was as if time had stopped, and he was again beside his wife 8 years ago, before the accident that took her from him. "Are you okay, mister?" Lily's voice brought him back to reality. "You look so sad." Ted blinked several times, trying to ward off the tears that threatened to form. "I'm fine, yes," he replied with a hoarse voice. "What's your name, little one?" "Lily," she replied, smiling in a way that lit up her whole face. "And that's my grandma Josephine," she added, pointing to the woman who was now hurrying across the sidewalk with an old umbrella in her hands. "Lily, for heaven's sake, come back here right now." "I'm sorry, sir, she's very spontaneous," said Josephine, pulling her granddaughter by the hand. Ted got out of the car, ignoring the rain that was still falling. He took his wallet out of his pocket and pulled out some $100 bills. "Please accept this as a thank you. Your granddaughter helped me a lot." Josephine straightened her posture, and even though she was much shorter than Ted, her gaze had a dignity that made him feel small. "I can't accept that, sir. Lily only did what anyone should do, help someone in need." The businessman put the money away, feeling strangely ashamed. His gaze wandered over the simple facade of the diner, the homemade pies in the display case, and returned to Lily, who was still smiling, now protected by her grandmother's umbrella. "You work here?" he asked, trying to keep the conversation going. "Yes, we make homemade pies. It's our livelihood," Josephine replied simply. At that moment, something changed inside Ted. Maybe it was Lily's birthmark, maybe it was Josephine's dignity, or maybe it was simply fate playing one of its tricks. But he knew, with a certainty he hadn't felt in years, that he couldn't simply start the car and drive away. Could I try one of your pies?" he asked, surprising himself. Lily's smile widened even more, and she jumped for joy, splashing, water everywhere. "Grandma makes the best carrot cake in the world. Come on, mister, come on." And so, on that rainy afternoon in Harmony Creek, Ted Vasconcelos, the construction magnate, found himself sitting at a plastic table, eating carrot cake with chocolate frosting, while a 6-year-old girl told him excitedly about how her grandfather fixed all the cars in the neighborhood. What he didn't know, as he savored that surprisingly delicious cake, was that his life was about to change completely, and that seemingly casual encounter would trigger a series of events that would bring to light long-buried secrets, shaking the power structures of his company, and above all, his heart hardened by years of solitude. The news that Ted Vasconcelos, the powerful real estate developer, was frequenting a small diner in the Harmony Creek suburbs spread quickly. In the weeks that followed that rainy afternoon, his red Ferrari became a constant presence in front of Josephine's modest establishment. On the 23rd floor of the tallest building in the city, Magnolia, Ted's 34-year-old niece and only living relative, watched the activity on the streets below from her luxurious office window. Her fingers drummed nervously on the mahogany desk as she reread the report that her assistant had prepared on her uncle's latest financial transactions. $50,000 in industrial kitchen equipment, she murmured to herself, frowning. What is that old man up to? On the other side of town, Josephine could hardly believe the transformation her little diner was undergoing. New ovens, an industrial refrigerator, gleaming stainless steel counters, all gifts from Ted, who insisted on calling it investment. "But Mr. Ted, this is too much," she protested every time he showed up with something new. "You've already done so much." "Mrs. Josephine," he replied with a smile that a few months ago no one would have believed possible to see on his face, "you're doing me a favor. Since I tasted your pies, I can't eat bakery ones anymore." But it wasn't just the pies that drew him there. Lily's presence had an almost magical effect on him. The girl, with her infinite curiosity and contagious joy, managed to bring a smile to his face, even on days when he arrived grumpy, worried about problems at the construction sites, or the endless board meetings. "Uncle Ted," she shouted every time she saw him arrive, running to hug his legs. The affectionate nickname, which at first bothered him because of its informality, now warmed his heart in a way he couldn't explain. One particularly busy afternoon, while Josephine was struggling to serve the customers who were beginning to discover her pies, Ted watched Lily playing with her dolls in a corner of the diner. The girl had created a small office for her clients, imitating the way he answered the phone. "No, no, Mrs. Doll," she said, holding a toy phone. "The renovation of your castle will take 3 more days. Yes, I know you have an important ball, but we need to replace all the enchanted tiles." Ted couldn't help but laugh. It was impressive how she absorbed everything around her, creating her own versions of the conversations she heard. It was at that moment that Clarice, his 49-year-old housekeeper, entered the diner. She had worked for the family for more than 2 decades and was one of the few people who knew the real Ted, the one that existed before the tragedy that took his wife. "Sir," she called discreetly, "Miss Magnolia is in the office asking for you. She said it's urgent." The smile disappeared from Ted's face. His niece had been showing an increasing interest in his activities since he had started frequenting the diner. At first, they were just casual questions about where he had lunch. Then, comments about how interesting it was to see a businessman of his caliber mixing with people so simple. "Tell her I'm in an important meeting," he replied, turning his attention back to Lily. "Sir," Clarice insisted, lowering her voice. "She mentioned something about investigations she's doing about the girl's family." Ted's blood ran cold. He knew that his niece was ambitious and that as the only apparent heir to his fortune, she did not look kindly on his closeness to Lily and Josephine. "Uncle Ted," Lily called, oblivious to the tension of the moment. "Do you want to play office with me? The Melissa doll has a serious problem with the roof of her castle." "Not now, sweetie," he replied, forcing a smile. "Uncle needs to take care of some things, but I'll be back soon, okay?" As he drove back to the city center, Ted couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. He knew his niece well. Magnolia wasn't the type to make empty threats. In the office, she awaited him with a folder of documents on the table. Her smile, cold as a winter morning, didn't reach her eyes. "Dear Uncle," she began, "we need to talk about your new friendships." "There's nothing to talk about, Magnolia. What I do with my time and my money is none of your business." "Oh, but it is," she replied, opening the folder. "Especially when it involves people linked to sensitive events from our past." Ted felt his heart race. "What are you talking about?" "The girl's mother, Irene. Does that name sound familiar? Because I found some very interesting records in the company archives." The businessman sat down heavily in his chair. Irene, why did that name provoke a distant echo in his memory? "She worked here," Magnolia continued, savoring each word. "In fact, she worked directly on the Harmony Creek Estates project, the one that had so many problems 3 years ago. And you know what's even more interesting? She disappeared mysteriously shortly after a meeting with the construction manager, Julio Mendonca." "Enough!" Ted thundered, slamming his hand on the table. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, Magnolia, but stop it now." "Game?" She laughed humorlessly. "I'm just protecting the family's interests, Uncle. Or should I say, protecting your interests. After all, you wouldn't want people to start speculating about your sudden closeness to the daughter of a missing former employee, would you?" At that moment, something clicked in Ted's mind. A hazy memory of a young woman entering his office, papers in hand, saying that she needed to show him something important about the construction contracts. He was so immersed in his grief at the time, so lost in alcohol and memories of Antonia, that he barely paid attention to what was happening in the company. "What do you want, Magnolia?" "I want you to stay away from them. Gradually, of course. We don't need a scandal. But if you continue with this inappropriate closeness, I will be forced to take steps to protect our company's name." Ted felt the weight of each word like a blow. The idea of walking away from Lily, of no longer seeing her smile, of not hearing her fantastic stories, was like losing Antonia again. But the implications of what Magnolia was saying were too serious to be ignored. What really happened to Irene? And why was his memory of that time so confused? He left the office feeling decades older. On the way home, he passed by the diner. Lily was on the sidewalk playing hopscotch with other children. Seeing him, she waved excitedly, her smile lighting up the whole street. Ted didn't stop. For the first time since he had met her, he drove straight past, pretending not to see the confused little face in the rearview mirror. At home, he went, straight to the bar that he had abandoned months ago. The bottle of whiskey was still there, waiting like an old, treacherous friend. As he poured the first drink, his hand trembled. Deep in his mind, a voice whispered that there was something wrong with that whole story, something he needed to find out before it was too late. The days that followed were like a dark fog for Ted. The bottle of whiskey, his old companion in, the lonely nights after Antonia's loss became his silent confidant again. In his mansion on the heights of Harmony Creek's most exclusive neighborhood, he isolated himself more and more, ignoring Josephine's insistent calls and the messages that Clarice conveyed about Lily asking for him every day. Clarice watched with growing concern as her employer sank back into the alcoholism that he had struggled so hard to overcome. In recent weeks, since he had started frequenting Josephine's diner, she had seen a different man emerge from that bitter shell, someone who smiled, who made plans, who seemed to finally be coming back to life. Now everything was falling apart. "You need to eat something," she insisted, placing a tray of soup next to the armchair where Ted spent hours staring into space, a glass of whiskey always at hand. "Leave me alone, Clarice," he mumbled, his voice hoarse from alcohol and disuse. At the diner, now equipped with the best equipment money could buy, Josephine tried to keep a smile on her face while serving her customers, but her heart ached to see Lily sitting by the window, her eyes fixed on the street, waiting for the red Ferrari that no longer appeared. "Grandma, is Uncle Ted sick?" the girl asked every afternoon, her small voice filled with worry. "We could make him a carrot cake to make him feel better." Josephine hugged her granddaughter, swallowing her own tears. How do you explain to a 6-year-old that sometimes adults walk away for no apparent reason? How do you make Lily understand that the grown-up world was too complicated, full of fears and secrets? One particularly busy morning at the diner, Lily was playing distractedly with her dolls when she started coughing. At first, Josephine wasn't worried. It was common for children to catch colds at that time of year. But when the cough didn't go away and the girl started to turn pale, the alarm sounded in her grandmother's heart. "Grandma, it's hard to breathe," Lily whispered, putting her little hand to her chest. Josephine's world stopped at that moment. Within minutes, she was in the emergency room with her granddaughter in her arms, her heart pounding with fear as she saw the girl's lips begin to turn blue. At the hospital, the doctors ran back and forth, speaking words that Josephine barely understood. Heart murmur, congenital condition, need for specific tests. Each medical term was like a stab in her chest. "Ma'am," explained Dr. Roberts, a middle-aged pediatric cardiologist finally, "your granddaughter has a serious heart condition that needs to be investigated. We'll need to do some specialized tests, but..." "But?" asked Josephine, feeling the weight of the unspoken word. "These are expensive tests, ma'am, very expensive, and from what I understand, you don't have health insurance." Josephine sat down heavily in the chair in the hospital hallway, her legs trembling. All the money she had managed to save in recent months, thanks to the growing traffic at the diner after the improvements made by Ted, wouldn't even come close to the amount needed for the tests. That's when Clarice rushed into the hospital. The housekeeper had heard about what had happened through a customer at the diner who frequented the mansion. "Mrs. Josephine," she called, sitting down next to the woman. "How is she?" "Oh, Clarice." Josephine finally let the tears run. "My little granddaughter, her heart." As Josephine explained the situation, Clarice felt her own heart tighten. In recent months, she had seen the genuine affection that her employer had developed for the girl. She knew that if he were in his normal state, he would already be there, moving heaven and earth to help Lily. "Mrs. Josephine," she said after a moment of reflection, "I need to tell you something. Something about Lily's mother." Josephine's face paled. "About Irene? What do you know about my daughter?" Clarice looked around, making sure they were alone. "She worked at Mr. Ted's company, and I don't think her disappearance was by chance." The words hung in the air like a heavy storm cloud. Josephine closed her eyes, remembering the day Irene came home agitated, saying that she had discovered something serious at the construction company where she worked. The next morning, she had disappeared, leaving only a note asking her mother to take care of Lily. "Why are you telling me this now?" asked Josephine, her voice trembling. "Because I think Miss Magnolia, Mr. Ted's niece, is using this to keep him away from you and Lily. She threatened to expose some kind of scandal, and since then he's gone back to drinking." At that moment, a sharp scream cut through the conversation. It was the nurse, calling for help from the room where Lily was. Josephine jumped up, her heart almost stopping as she saw her little granddaughter having a shortness of breath attack. "We need to take her to the ICU," announced Dr. Roberts, his voice urgent, "and we need those tests immediately." Josephine felt the world spinning. It was Clarice who held her up, preventing her from falling. "I'm going to call Mr. Ted," decided the housekeeper. "No!" protested Josephine. "I don't want to owe anything to that family, not after what they did to my daughter." "Mrs. Josephine," Clarice held her hands, "Mr. Ted is not a bad person. He's suffering, he's lost, but I know that if he knows that Lily is sick, he'll help. He loves that girl as if she were his own daughter." At the mansion, Ted was in his office, the half-empty bottle of whiskey on the table, when his cell phone rang. It was Clarice's 10th call that hour. Annoyed, he finally answered. "What is it?" he asked sharply. "Sir," Clarice's voice was choked. "It's Lily. She's very sick at the hospital, needing expensive tests, specialized treatment. She may not survive if she doesn't get help." "Soon." The glass of whiskey slipped from Ted's hand, shattering on the floor. For a moment it was as if the world had stopped. The fog of alcohol began to dissipate, replaced by a painful clarity. "Which hospital?" he asked, already looking for his car keys. "You've been drinking, you can't drive. I'll send the driver." "Which hospital?" he thundered. As Clarice passed on the information, Ted was already in the elevator. His mind, although still numb from the alcohol, focused on a single thought. He couldn't lose Lily. He couldn't allow another person he loved to be taken from him. What he didn't know was that, at that very moment, Magnolia was also receiving a call from a private investigator she had hired to rummage through Josephine and her family's past. And the information he brought was about to change everything. St. Vincent's Hospital never seemed so immense and intimidating to Ted as it did that night. His footsteps echoed through the white hallways as he made his way to the pediatric ward, fighting the dizziness caused by alcohol and fear. Clarice's words hammered in his mind. Lily might not survive. On the way, he passed a small hospital, a chapel. For the first time in 8 years, since he lost Antonia, Ted stopped and entered. The place was empty, lit only by the flickering light of a few candles. He fell to his knees, his legs no longer able to support the weight of so much. Guilt and regret. "Please," he whispered into the silence, "don't take her too." In the hallway of the pediatric ICU, Josephine remained seated, her hands intertwined in a silent prayer. Seeing Ted approaching, her eyes, normally so gentle, hardened. "What are you doing here?" she asked, standing up. "After weeks of not giving us any news, ignoring my granddaughter's tears, now you decide to show up?" The harshness in Josephine's words was like knives in Ted's chest. He knew he deserved every one of them. Mrs. Josephine, his voice came out choked, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but you're drunk, she stated, the disgust evident in her voice. You came here like this? To the hospital where my granddaughter is fighting for her life? Before Ted could answer, Dr. Roberts approached with a clipboard in his hands. His face was grave. Mrs. Josephine, he began, the preliminary tests confirmed our suspicions. Lily has a complex congenital heart disease that needs to be treated immediately. She will need a series of specialized procedures and later surgery. Josephine felt her legs weaken. It was Ted who supported her, guiding her back to the chair. How much? He asked the doctor. How much does all the treatment cost? Dr. Roberts adjusted his glasses, uncomfortable. We're talking about something around $300,000, considering all the procedures, the surgery, and the post-operative care. Do it, said Ted immediately, taking out his wallet. Do everything that's necessary. I'll pay every penny. No! Protested Josephine, standing up again. I won't accept your money, not after... After what? Interrupted Ted, his voice firmer now. What's going on, Mrs. Josephine? Why so much resentment? It was Clarice, who had been watching everything from a corner, who answered, Tell him, Mrs. Josephine. Tell him about Irene. The name seemed to suck all the air from the hallway. Josephine looked at Ted for a long time, as if assessing his soul. My daughter, she began, her voice trembling, worked at your company 3 years ago. She was a secretary in the contracts department. One day she came home agitated, saying that she had discovered something terrible, something about embezzlement of materials, overbilling on public works. The next morning, she disappeared. Ted, he felt the floor disappear beneath his feet. That time, he barely remembered the days after Antonia's loss. He drowned himself in work and alcohol, signed documents without reading them, left everything in the hands of Magnolia and the managers. I didn't know, he murmured. Of course you didn't know, Josephine's voice rose. The all-powerful Ted Vasconcelos, too busy with his pain to see the corruption happening under his nose, too busy to notice that an employee had disappeared. After trying to do the right thing, the silence that followed was interrupted by the sound of Magnolia's heels on the hospital floor. She came hurrying, holding a folder of documents. Uncle, she called, ignoring the others present. We need to talk now. I'm not going anywhere, replied Ted, without taking his eyes off Josephine. Not until I understand exactly what happened to Irene. Ah, but that's exactly what we need to talk about. Magnolia's smile was icy. About Irene, and about how you, she pointed to Josephine, are hiding the truth from all of us. Josephine paled. What are you talking about? Magnolia opened the folder, taking out some papers. My private investigator discovered something very interesting. You receive monthly deposits into a bank account. Deposits that started exactly after your daughter's disappearance. That's a lie, protested Josephine. Bank statements don't lie, Mrs. Josephine, continued Magnolia, her tone falsely sweet. You're being paid to keep your daughter hidden, aren't you? To create this whole story of a mysterious disappearance? Ted watched the scene with growing horror. His mind, still partially dulled by alcohol, struggled to process all the information. That's when a sharp sound cut through the air. The alarm of the equipment in Lily's room. Dr. Roberts and 2 nurses ran inside, while Josephine screamed her granddaughter's name. She's going into cardiogenic shock, announced one of the nurses. We need to stabilize her immediately. Ted watched, paralyzed, as the medical team worked frantically. For a moment, through the glass of the ICU, his eyes met Lily's. The girl was conscious despite the oxygen mask, and even in that situation, even after weeks of abandonment, she smiled at him. That smile, so like Antonia's, was like a punch to his stomach. Suddenly, Everything became clear in his mind. Magnolias, manipulations, his own cowardly behavior, the truths that needed to be discovered. "Enough," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos of the moment. "Magnolia, you're fired." "What?" His niece's eyes widened. "You can't." "I can and I will. And tomorrow I'm going to start a complete audit of the company. In all the contracts, all the works, everything that's happened in the last 3 years. Uncle, you're drunk. You don't know what you're saying." "For the first time in a long time, I know exactly what I'm saying," he replied, turning to Josephine. "Ma'am, forgive me for what I did and for what I failed to do. I will find out the truth about your daughter, no matter the cost. But now, please let me help Lily." Josephine looked at the man in front of her for a long time. It was no longer the arrogant businessman in the red Ferrari, nor the lost drunkard of the last few weeks. He was just a broken man, begging for a chance to do the right thing. "Okay," she replied finally, "but I do this for Lily, not for you." As Dr. Roberts arranged for Lily's transfer to a hospital specializing in pediatric cardiology, Magnolia hurried out, her heels echoing through the hallway. In her purse, a cell phone vibrated insistently. It was Julio Mendonca, the construction manager, wanting to know why she wasn't answering his calls. What nobody knew was that, at that very moment, in a small town upstate, a 38-year-old woman was looking at an old photograph. In it, a young Irene smiled next to her small daughter. On the back of the photo, a phone number and a single word: hope. The days that followed Lily's hospitalization were a roller coaster of emotions. St. Luke's Children's Heart Hospital, where the girl was transferred, was the best in the region, with state-of-the-art equipment and a highly specialized medical team. Even so, the battle for the little one's life would be long and difficult. Ted practically moved into the hospital. A private room was prepared for Lily, with walls decorated with colorful drawings and a sofa bed where he and Josephine took turns during the nights. The businessman had given up alcohol completely, replacing it with gallons of coffee as he coordinated 2 simultaneous battles: Lily's recovery and the investigation into Irene's disappearance. "You need to rest," insisted Clarice, bringing meals that he barely touched. "You won't help anyone if you get sick too." But Ted couldn't rest. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lily's face turning blue that terrible night in the ICU. And now, watching her sleep, connected to various devices that monitored her little heart, he felt that every second was too precious to be wasted on sleep. "Uncle Ted," called Lily one morning, her voice weak behind the oxygen mask. "Tell me a story." He held her delicate little hand, careful of the IV tubes. "What kind of story? What kind of story do you want to hear, sweetie?" "A princess story, but without a castle. A princess who fixes cars, just like me." Ted felt tears sting his eyes. Even sick, even after everything, she still maintained that contagious joy, that ability to see magic in the simplest things. On the other side of the room's glass, Josephine watched the scene with a heavy heart. In recent weeks, she had seen a profound change in Ted. The arrogant man she had met that rainy afternoon had given way to someone humble, determined to fix his mistakes. "Mrs. Josephine," called Oliver, Ted's former lawyer who had been recalled to help with the investigations. He was a 62-year-old man with gray hair and an air of wisdom in his tired eyes. "We need to talk about something important." They went to the small hospital chapel, which had become a kind of refuge for serious conversations. Oliver carried a thick folder of documents. "The audit at the company is revealing very serious things," he began. The scheme to divert materials was just the tip of the iceberg. There was a complete network of corruption involving fraudulent bids, bribes, falsified documents. "And my daughter discovered all of that," completed Josephine, her heart heavy. "Exactly, but there's more," Oliver lowered his voice. "We found records of suspicious bank transfers to an account in the Cayman Islands. The account holder is Julio Mendonca, but the amounts were authorized by Magnolia. At that moment, they were interrupted by a nurse who ran into the chapel. 'Mrs. Josephine, the girl is having another crisis.' Panic took over the hospital. Lily had had a severe arrhythmia, and her blood pressure was dropping dangerously. Dr. Bennett, the pediatric cardiologist who was following the case, ordered a series of emergency tests. 'Her heart is very overloaded,' explained the doctor a few hours later, showing the test results to Ted and Josephine. 'We need to do the surgery as soon as possible, but—' "But?" asked Ted, feeling the fear grow in his chest. "She's going to need a heart valve transplant, and for that, we need a compatible donor." The silence that followed was deafening. Josephine covered her face with her hands, letting the tears run freely. "How much time do we have?" asked Ted, his voice hoarse. "Weeks, maybe. And finding a compatible donor won't be easy. Her blood type is rare, and we need someone with similar physical characteristics." That's when Clarice, who was in the hallway, let out an audible sigh. Everyone turned to her. "What is it?" asked Ted. "Sir, you have the same blood type as Lily. I know because I've taken care of your exams for years." Dr. Bennett immediately perked up. "That could be a possibility. We could do compatibility tests." "Do it," interrupted Ted without hesitating. "Do all the necessary tests." "Mr. Ted," the doctor hesitated, "I need to warn you. If you are compatible, it would be a risky surgery, especially considering your recent history with alcohol." "I don't care," he replied firmly. "If there's a chance to save Lily, I'll do whatever it takes." While preparations for the tests were being made, Oliver continued his investigation. In his makeshift office at the hospital, he received an intriguing call. "Mr. Oliver," said a female voice on the other end of the line, "my name is Linda. I worked with Irene at the construction company." The lawyer immediately turned on the recorder. "Miss Linda, why are you looking for me now?" "Because I saw in the newspapers about the girl Lily, and because I can no longer carry this secret." Linda then told a story that made Oliver's blood run cold. According to her, on the night before she disappeared, Irene had managed to copy documents that proved not only the corruption scheme, but also a much more serious crime. Magnolia and Julio weren't just embezzling money, revealed Linda. They were using low-quality materials in the works, falsifying technical reports. A building collapsed because of that, but they covered it all up. "And where is Irene now?" asked Oliver, his heart racing. "I can't say over the phone, but she's alive, Mr. Oliver, and she has proof of everything." In Lily's room, oblivious to all these revelations, the girl played with a small stethoscope that Dr. Bennett had given her. She held it against her favorite doll's chest, making a serious doctor's face. "Uncle Ted," she called when Ted entered the room after his first round of exams. "Come here. I want to listen to your heart, too." He sat on the edge of the bed, allowing her to put the stethoscope on his chest. The smile that lit up Lily's face was worth more than his entire fortune. "Your heart makes a drum noise," she laughed. "Strong like God's." Ted hugged her delicately, trying not to disturb the wires and tubes that surrounded her. In his mind, a certainty was forming. No matter what happened, he would give his last breath to save that child. What he didn't know was that, at that very moment, Magnolia was in her luxurious apartment, destroying documents and making frantic calls. The noose was tightening, and she needed to act fast. In her hurry, she didn't notice the small recording device hidden under her desk. A gift, left by Oliver during an apparently casual visit days before. And in the coming hours, the words she exchanged with Julio Mendonca would be the key to unraveling the entire mystery. The recording captured in Magnolia's apartment proved to be a veritable Pandora's box. Oliver listened to the conversation. Dozens of times in his makeshift office at the hospital, each repetition revealing new layers of a conspiracy that went far beyond what they had imagined. "We need to get rid of everything, Julio." Magnolia's voice sounded shrill, almost hysterical. "My uncle is digging too deep. If he finds out about the Primavera residences..." "Calm down." Julio's deep voice tried to appease. "No one can prove anything. The technical reports were all altered. The inspectors were paid. And what about Irene? What if she shows up now? That damn woman kept copies of everything." The Primavera residences. Oliver vaguely remembered the development, a popular housing complex that should have been the poster child for the construction company's social housing program. The project had been cancelled after technical problems, and the land remained abandoned. Meanwhile, in Lily's room, the routine of exams continued. The girl faced each procedure with a courage that moved even the most experienced doctors. Even when the needles hurt, even when the medications made her nauseous, she found the strength to smile. "You know, Uncle Ted," she said one afternoon while they were playing with a puzzle, "Mom always said that we have to be strong like little ants." Ted, who was helping her fit a piece, stopped suddenly. "Your mother talked a lot about ants." "Yes," Lily's eyes sparkled. "She said that little ants are small but very strong, and that they keep food in secret places for the winter." That seemingly innocent conversation sparked a light in Ted's mind. He remembered something he had ignored years ago, an internal company project called ANT, which catalogued all of the construction company's land and properties. "Oliver," he called, rushing out of the room. "We need to look for something in the company's old archives." The lawyer was already coming towards him, holding a laptop. "Ted, you need to hear this. It's about the Primavera residences." In the next few minutes, as they listened to the recording, the pieces began to fall into place. The Primavera residences had not been just another failed project. It was the epicenter of the entire corruption scheme. Magnolia and Julio had overbilled the costs, used materials of very poor quality, and worse, ignored all warnings about the land being geologically unstable. "Irene discovered everything," murmured Ted, running his hands through his graying hair. "That's why she disappeared." "There's more," continued Oliver. "Remember Linda, her former colleague? She told me that Irene didn't just run away with documents. She took something else, something physical that proved the fraud." At that moment, Josephine, who had overheard part of the conversation, approached. "The samples," she said, her voice trembling. "Irene brought home some concrete samples the night before she left." "And where are those samples now?" asked Oliver anxiously. "I don't know. She took everything with her, but..." Josephine hesitated. "She left one thing, a key." "What key?" Ted turned abruptly. "To a storage unit. She made me promise that I would only use it in case of extreme necessity. She said it was our life insurance." The conversation was interrupted by an alert from the equipment in Lily's room. The girl's pressure had dropped again, and Dr. Bennett ran to attend to her. "We don't have much time," said the doctor after stabilizing the patient. "Mr. Ted, your compatibility tests are ready. You are a viable donor, but I need to be clear. The surgery will be extremely risky for both." Ted looked at Lily through the glass of the room. She had fallen asleep, her breathing still irregular, but her little face maintained that angelic serenity that so reminded him of Antonia. "How long do we have until the surgery?" he asked. "Ideally, a week, to do all the preparations and final exams. But in her condition, every day is a risk." Ted then made a decision. Turning to Oliver and Josephine, he spoke with determination. "We have a week to find Irene and expose everything. Mrs. Josephine, we need that key." The next hours were of intense activity. While Clarice stayed with Lily, The others headed to Josephine's house. The key was kept inside an old cookie tin, along with a sequence of numbers written on a yellowed piece of paper. "They look like coordinates," observed Oliver, typing the numbers into his cell phone. The indicated location was a storage unit on the outskirts of Harmony Creek, near an abandoned industrial area. When they arrived there, it was already night. The place seemed deserted, with only a few dim lights illuminating the entrance. "Unit 237, read Josephine on the paper. That was Lily's birthday, July 23rd. The storage unit was small, but what they found inside left everyone speechless. There were dozens of folders organized methodically, each containing documents, photos, and, more importantly, samples of building materials labeled and dated. Irene documented everything, whispered Oliver, leafing through the papers, every deviation, every fraud, every threat she received. But the most impressive discovery was in a sealed envelope addressed to Ted Vasconcelos. Inside, there was a handwritten letter and a flash drive. "Dear Mr. Vasconcelos," Ted began to read aloud, his voice choked, "if you are reading this, it is because the truth has finally come to light. I know you are not a bad man, just someone who got lost in his own pain. I kept all the evidence not for revenge, but for justice, and mainly to protect my daughter." The reading was interrupted by a call from Clarice. "Sir," her voice was distressed, "come back quickly. Lily is having a bad crisis, and there's someone else here wanting to see her." "Who?" asked Ted, already running to the car. "A woman. She says she's Irene." The way back to the hospital seemed endless. When they finally arrived at the pediatric ward, they found a scene that no one expected. Through the glass of Lily's room, they saw a woman of about 38 years, dark hair, and the same sweet smile as her daughter, sitting on the edge of the bed, singing softly to calm the girl during another difficult procedure. But there was no time for emotional reunions now. Dr. Bennett approached urgently. "We need to do the surgery. Now." While the medical team prepared, Ted watched mother and daughter through the glass. Suddenly, he felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Irene. "Why did you come back now?" he asked. "Because some things are more important than fear or justice," she replied, looking at Lily. "Some things are about love." At that moment, another alarm sounded in the room. Lily's heart rate was critical. It was time for surgery, and there was no more time to lose. What nobody knew was that while the medical team prepared for the delicate operation, Magnolia had discovered about the storage unit, and she was on her way, determined to destroy the last evidence that could incriminate her, not knowing that it was already too late. Oliver had scanned everything and sent it to the competent authorities minutes before. The surgical center at St. Luke's Hospital turned into a silent battlefield that early morning. On one side, a team of doctors and nurses fought to save the life of a 6-year-old girl. On the other, in an adjacent room, other professionals prepared Ted for the procedure that could cost his own life. "Mr. Vasconcelos," explained Dr. Bennett as the team prepared the equipment, "I'm going to repeat the risks one last time. You can still give up." "No," he replied firmly, watching through the glass as they anesthetized Lily. "There's nothing to think about." In the waiting room, Irene held her mother Josephine's hand tightly. After 3 years of forced separation, the two had barely had time to hug properly before the emergency of the surgery threw them into that situation. "Forgive me, Mom," whispered Irene, tears streaming down her face. "I should have found another way." Josephine squeezed her daughter's hand. "You did what you needed to do, to protect yourself, to protect Lily. But if I had stayed, if I had sought help, then you probably wouldn't be alive to tell the story," interrupted Oliver, who had just arrived after coordinating the scanning and sending of all the evidence found in the storage unit. "Ladies, you need to know what we discovered about the Primavera residences. In the next 2 hours, while the surgeries were taking place, Oliver explained in detail the extent of the fraud. The Primavera Residences was not just an overbilled venture, it was a time bomb. Magnolia and Julio had ignored geological studies that pointed to serious risks of collapse, using materials of very poor quality to maximize their profits. If that housing complex had been built, explained Oliver, hundreds of families could have lost their lives when the land gave way. That's why they were so desperate to silence me, completed Irene, her voice trembling. It wasn't just about the embezzled money. It was to avoid a disaster that could send them to jail for the rest of their lives. Clarice, who was listening to everything in silence, suddenly stood up. "There's more," she said, taking an envelope out of her bag. "I found this in the boss's office, hidden in an old folder." It was a confidential report, dated from the time when Antonia, Ted's wife, was still alive. In it, she expressed concerns about irregularities she had noticed in some contracts signed by Magnolia. "Antonia was an auditor," explained Clarice. "She was starting to investigate her niece's activities when the accident happened." A heavy silence fell over the room. The implication of that revelation was too terrible to be put into words. In the surgical center, the hours passed. With torturous slowness, Lily's surgery was extremely delicate. Each movement of the doctors needed to be meticulously calculated. In the next room, the team operating on Ted faced its own complications. "Pressure dropping," announced one of the anesthesiologists. "His liver is reacting worse than we expected." Dr. Bennett, who coordinated both teams, had to make quick decisions. "Increase the support. We can't stop now." In the waiting room, Josephine prayed quietly, an old rosary between her fingers. Irene walked back and forth, occasionally stopping to look through the glass doors that led to the surgical center. That's when Linda arrived, panting and visibly disturbed. "Mrs. Irene, Magnolia found out about the storage unit. She's going there now." "It doesn't matter anymore," replied Oliver, showing the confirmation on his cell phone. "All the evidence has already been sent to the FBI and the district attorney's office. At this moment, they should be issuing the arrest warrants." As if to confirm his words, Linda's cell phone rang. It was a colleague from the construction company. Julio Mendonca had just been arrested while trying to board a flight out of the country. The hours continued to pass. In the surgical center, the situation became more complicated. Lily's heart was having difficulty accepting the new valve, while Ted's body showed worrying signs of rejection to the procedure. "She's too strong to give up now," murmured Dr. Bennett, more to herself than to her team. "And so is he." In the waiting room, Irene suddenly stopped her nervous walk. "Mom," she called, "remember what you always said? About how God works in mysterious ways." Josephine nodded, tears in her eyes. "All these years in hiding, all this fear. And now we're here, seeing the man I feared so much giving his own life to save my daughter." "He changed," said Clarice, softly. "Lily changed him. Brought back the man he was before he lost Antonia." A sound of heels in the hallway made everyone turn around. It was Magnolia, but not the elegant and controlled Magnolia of before. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared, her eyes wild with panic. "Where's my uncle?" she demanded. "I need to talk to him now." "He's in surgery," replied Oliver calmly, "and you're under arrest." As if his words were a signal, 2 FBI agents who were discreetly positioned in the hallway approached, handcuffs in hand. "No!" she screamed, recoiling. "You don't understand! I did all this for him. The company was sinking after Antonia died. He was destroying everything he built, drinking, signing contracts without reading them. Someone needed to take the reins." "And that justifies putting lives at risk?" asked Irene, taking a step forward. "Justifies trying to silence me?" Magnolia turned to her, her eyes flashing with hatred. You ruined everything. It was supposed to be perfect. The Primavera residences would be demolished accidentally before being inhabited. The insurance would cover the losses, and no one would need to know. "Ma'am," interrupted one of the officers, "you have the right to remain silent. Everything you say can and will be used against you." As Magnolia was taken away, still shouting accusations and threats, the doors of the surgical center opened. Dr. Bennett came out, removing her surgical mask. Her face was exhausted, but there was a gleam in her eyes. "The surgery is over," she announced. "Lily is responding well to the procedure, and Mr. Ted—" Everyone held their breath. "He's as stubborn as the little one," smiled the doctor. "He'll need a lot of rest and rehabilitation, but he'll survive." Josephine's cry of relief echoed through the hallway. Irene hugged her mother, their tears mixing. Clarice needed to sit down, her legs wobbly with emotion. "How long until we can see them?" asked Oliver, his normally controlled voice betraying his emotion. "They will be in the ICU for at least 48 hours, replied the doctor. "But—" She hesitated, a small smile on her lips. "There's something you need to know. When Lily was waking up from the anesthesia, still half groggy, you know what she asked?" "What?" everyone asked in unison. "She wanted to know if Uncle Ted's heart still made a drum noise." At that moment, as the sun began to rise over Harmony Creek, illuminating the old cobblestone streets, a new story began to be written, a story of redemption, of forgiveness, of second chances. And in 2 ICU beds, side by side, a businessman and a little girl fought to come back to life, their hearts beating in a synchronized rhythm of hope. The 48 hours following the surgery were the longest in everyone's life. In the ICU, Lily and Ted occupied adjacent rooms, separated only by a glass wall. The doctors had agreed to keep them close, after the heart monitors showed that both had more stable heartbeats when they could see each other. "It's impressive," commented Dr. Bennett. "With her team observing the vital data, it's as if they're helping each other recover." Irene spent hours sitting between the 2 rooms, dividing her time between holding her daughter's hand and watching the man who, against all odds, had become the savior of her little one. The respiratory support machines made a rhythmic, almost hypnotic noise, marking the passage of time in that aseptic environment. "You were right, Mom," she said to Josephine, who knitted silently in a nearby armchair. "Sometimes we need to give people a second chance." Josephine smiled softly, her fingers never stopping their movement with the needles. She was making a small, light pink blanket for when Lily could finally leave the ICU. "You know, daughter," she replied, "there are 3 types of people in the world. Those who are born good and remain so, those who are born good but get lost along the way, and those who need to learn to be good through pain and love." "And what type is Mr. Ted?" asked Irene, watching the sleeping businessman, his face still pale but serene. "He's the type who needed to break completely in order to rebuild himself," replied Josephine wisely. In the hallway, Oliver coordinated a veritable task force over the phone. The investigations into the corruption scheme at the construction company had expanded far beyond Harmony Creek. The arrest of Magnolia and Julio Mendonca was causing a domino effect in the construction sector throughout the region. 3 more businessmen were arrested this morning, he informed Clarice, who arrived bringing coffee for everyone. And the documents that Irene kept are revealing a scheme much larger than we imagined. Clarice sighed, distributing the cups of coffee. "You know what's most ironic? If Magnolia hadn't been so greedy, if she had only stolen the money without compromising the safety of the works, she might never have been discovered." "Greed always takes its toll," replied Oliver, adjusting his glasses. "But there's something that still intrigues me. Why did Ted never notice anything? He's always been an astute businessman." It was Linda, who was sitting nearby organizing documents, who answered, "Sometimes pain blinds us." After Mrs. Antonia was gone, it was as if he had built a wall around himself. He only saw what Magnolia wanted him to see. Inside the ICU, Lily began to show the first signs of waking up from sedation. Her small fingers moved slightly, and her eyes blinked a few times before opening completely. "Mom?" she called, her voice hoarse and weak behind the oxygen mask. Irene jumped up, running to her daughter's side. "I'm here, my love. Mom is here." "Uncle Ted." Lily tried to turn her head to look at the room next door, but the tubes and wires limited her movements. "He's right there, sweetie," reassured Irene. "He's recovering just like you." "Did he give me a piece of his heart?" asked the girl, her big eyes full of curiosity even through the haze of the medications. "Yes, my love. He gave you a very special gift." Lily smiled weakly. "So, now he's my heart dad?" The innocent question caught everyone by surprise. Irene felt tears run down her face, while Josephine let her knitting fall into her lap, touched. In the room next door, without anyone noticing, Ted had woken up and heard the conversation. A lone tear ran down his face as he absorbed the meaning of those words. The following hours were of slow but steady progress. The medical team began to gradually reduce the sedation of both patients, allowing longer periods of consciousness. It was during one of those moments that something happened that Dr. Bennett would later describe as a miracle of modern medicine. Ted, still weak but already able to communicate, asked to have his bed moved closer to the glass that separated the rooms. Lily, seeing the movement, also asked to be brought closer. "Hi, sweetie," he said, his voice hoarse but full of emotion. "Hi, Uncle Ted," she replied, smiling through the oxygen mask. "Did you know that now we have the same heart?" "It's true," he smiled back. "And you know what? I think my heart always knew it needed to find you." It was at that moment that Clarice ran into the ICU, momentarily forgetting all the hygiene and silence protocols. "Mr. Ted, I just received a call from the company's archives. They found something I think you need to see." In her trembling hands, she held an old folder, yellowed by time. Inside, there was a document that made everyone's heart, even the newly operated ones, race. It was a letter from Antonia, dated a few days before her departure. "Dear Ted," Clarice began to read, her voice choked. "If you are reading this, it is because what I feared most has finally happened. I discovered terrible things about Magnolia's business, things that can destroy not only our company, but innocent lives. Tomorrow I will confront her with the evidence I gathered. I know it's dangerous, but I can no longer live with this heavy conscience. If something happens to me, know that my biggest regret will be not having had time to give you the child we dreamed of so much. But I believe that fate has its own plans, and that one day you will find a new reason to smile." The silence that followed was deafening. Ted closed his eyes, decades of pain and guilt finally making sense. Next to him, separated only by glass, Lily looked at him with a wisdom beyond her years. "Uncle Ted," she called softly, "did Aunt Antonia send me to take care of your heart?" The question, in its deep innocence, broke all barriers. Ted began to cry, not tears of sadness or regret, but of understanding and acceptance. It was as if Antonia, even after so long, had found a way to fulfill her promise, not through a biological child, but through a little girl who had inherited not only a part of her physical heart, but all her emotional heart. Outside the ICU, Oliver received another important call. The police had found in a private safe belonging to Magnolia evidence that linked her and Julio directly to the accident that took Antonia's life. It had not been an accident after all, but that was a revelation that could wait. For now, in that ICU illuminated by the soft light of dusk, a new type of family was forming. A family built not by blood, but by love, by shared pain, and by hope reborn. And through the glass that separated their rooms, Ted and Lily continued to look. at each other, their hearts beating in sync, as if they had always been destined to meet. The news that Antonia's accident may not have been accidental fell like a bombshell on everyone. Oliver decided to withhold the information temporarily, allowing Ted and Lily to recover properly before dealing with this further devastating revelation. Meanwhile, life in the hospital followed its own rhythm, marked by the constant beep of heart monitors and the small daily victories in the recovery of both patients. A week after the surgery, Dr. Bennett finally authorized the transfer of Ted and Lily to regular rooms. In a gesture that surprised the hospital staff, she allowed them to stay in the same large room, adapted especially to accommodate them. Medically speaking, she explained to the team, the proximity between them is accelerating the recovery of both. Oxygenation levels, blood pressure, everything improves when they are together. The room soon became the emotional heart of the hospital. Josephine decorated the walls with colorful drawings made by the children from the diner who missed their little friend. Irene brought some of Lily's toys, including the toy stethoscope that was now her favorite. "Grandma," called Lily one afternoon, while Josephine arranged the flowers that a customer had sent, "tell that story of when Mom was little, the one about the hurt bird." Josephine smiled, sitting between the two beds. Ted, who was reading some documents that Oliver had brought, lowered the papers, interested. "Your mother was about your age," began Josephine, her eyes sparkling with the memory. "One day she found a baby robin fallen from its nest. Instead of just picking up the little bird, she stood there, under the tree, for hours, watching. When I asked her why she didn't bring him home, you know what she said?" Lily shook her head, her big eyes fixed on her grandmother. She said, "Mom, sometimes we need to wait for the right time to help. If I take him now, his mom won't know where to look." And she was right. At the end of the day, the robin's mom appeared and managed to take the chick back to the nest. "Just like Mom did with me?" asked Lily innocently. "Waited for the right time to come back?" The room fell silent. Irene, who had just entered bringing a small fruit basket, felt tears fill her eyes. "Yes, my love," she replied, approaching her daughter's bed. "Sometimes to protect those we love, we need to wait for the right time." Ted watched the scene with a lump in his throat. How much suffering had that family gone through because of the crimes committed in his company, under his nose? The guilt gnawed at him, even knowing that he had also been a victim of Magnolia's manipulations. "You know, Uncle Ted." Lily's voice brought him back to the present. "Mom also fixed things, just like me." "Really?" He smiled, turning carefully in bed to look at her better. "Yes, she fixed the numbers that were wrong in the company. She explained to me once that wrong numbers can hurt people, just like loose screws on cars." The simplicity with which Lily translated such complex issues into her childish language was impressive. Ted realized that she had inherited not only the mechanical intuition of her grandfather, but also the sense of justice of her mother. In the hallway, Clarice spoke in a low voice with Oliver. The lawyer had spent the whole morning at the courthouse following the developments in the case. "Magnolia is negotiating a plea bargain," he informed. "She knows that the evidence is irrefutable and is trying to reduce her sentence." "And what about the other matter?" asked Clarice, referring to Magnolia's possible connection to Antonia's death. "The investigations are progressing. They found records of suspicious payments to a mechanic shop at the time. Apparently, someone tampered with the brakes on her." "Ugh!" Clarice put her hands to her mouth, horrified. "How are we going to tell the boss?" "At the right time," replied Oliver, adjusting his glasses. "Now he needs to focus on recovering and rebuilding his life." Inside the room, oblivious to this conversation, Ted and Lily had started a new ritual. Every afternoon, when the nurses came to change the dressings, they told each other stories. "Today is your turn, Uncle Ted," reminded Lily. while the nurse delicately changed the dressing on her chest. Ted thought for a moment. I'm going to tell a story about a very special princess. A princess who didn't live in a castle, but in a magical diner, where her grandmother's pies had the power to make people smile. As he narrated, transforming their own story into a modern fairy tale, Irene watched with a mixture of emotions. It was strange to see how life had taken so many turns. The man she had feared so much, against whom she had kept so much evidence, had become a kind of father to her daughter. "Mr. Ted," she called when the nurse finished the dressings, and Lily had fallen asleep. "Can I ask you a question?" He nodded, already imagining what was coming. "Why didn't you ever really look at the documents that passed through your desk? How didn't you see what was happening?" Ted was silent for a long moment, looking at the sleeping Lily. "When we lose someone we love," he began finally, "it's as if the world loses its colors. I saw, but I didn't see. I heard, but I didn't listen. I was alive, but I wasn't living." "And now?" she asked softly. "Now," he smiled. "Now I see colors I didn't even know existed." At that moment, Oliver entered the room carrying an old box. "They found this in Magnolia's old office," he explained. "I think you need to see." Inside the box, there were dozens of old photos of the construction company. In one of them, Antonia appeared smiling next to a group of employees during a year-end party. And there, almost hidden in the corner of the photo, was a young Irene. "I remember that day," said Irene, taking the photo with trembling hands. "Mrs. Antonia had just announced a scholarship program for the children of employees. She said that children are the future, and that we needed to invest in that future." "She was always like that," murmured Ted, his voice choked. "Always thinking of others. And always very perceptive," completed Oliver, taking more documents from the box. "Look at this." It was a detailed report written by Antonia about irregularities she had begun to notice in the contracts. On the last page, there was a handwritten note. "I need to talk to Ted about Magnolia. Something is very wrong." The date of the document was 3 days before the accident. Ted let the diary fall, his mind spinning with the revelation. At the same instant, Oliver and Irene entered the room. A glance was enough for them to know that he had discovered. "How long have you known?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Magnolia confessed today," replied Oliver softly. "She ordered someone to tamper with the brakes on the car." The silence that followed was deafening. Lily, realizing the tension, left her cars aside and reached out to Ted. "Uncle Ted," she called in her sweet voice, "when we find out that something is more broken than we thought, that means it will need more love to fix, right?" The girl's words hit Ted like a ray of wisdom. He took her little hand, feeling the soft pulse that beat in sync with his own heart, the heart they now shared. "Yes, sweetie," he replied, tears running freely down his face. "And you know what? I think that's why God made our paths cross on that rainy afternoon, because sometimes we need a little mechanic angel to fix not only cars, but also broken hearts." At that moment, as if the universe wanted to confirm his words, a ray of sunshine crossed the hospital window, creating a rainbow on the white walls of the room. Lily clapped excitedly, while the adults watched the phenomenon with teary eyes. "Look, Uncle Ted," she exclaimed, "the sky is also sending colors to help fix the sadness." Josephine, who had quietly entered the room, approached her granddaughters. "In bed." "You know, my love, your mom always said that the most beautiful colors only appear after the rain." "Just like what happened to us, right?" replied Lily, looking between her mother, her grandmother, and Ted. "First came the heavy rain, then the broken car, then the hospital. But now there's a rainbow." The profound wisdom contained in the simplicity of that observation left everyone speechless. It was as if Lily, in her innocence, had perfectly summarized the journey that everyone had taken, a journey of pain, fear, and loss that in some mysterious way had been transformed into a story of love, healing, and redemption. Outside the hospital, the city of Harmony Creek continued its routine. But inside that room, a new kind of miracle was happening. Not only the physical recovery of two hearts that now beat as one, but the emotional healing of souls who had found in each other the strength to start over. The impact of Magnolia's confession about Antonia's death reverberated for days in the hospital. Ted alternated between moments of deep sadness and periods of a silent anger that only Lily's presence could mitigate. The girl, with her extraordinary sensitivity, seemed to know exactly when to approach and when to give space for Uncle Ted to process his emotions. One particularly difficult morning, after a night of nightmares in which Ted relived Antonia's accident, it was Lily's voice that brought him back to reality. "Uncle Ted!" she called, sitting on her bed with a photo album in her lap, a gift from one of the nurses to help her pass the time. "Come see what I did." Approaching with his cane, still feeling the pain from the surgery, Ted saw that she had organized several photos in sequence. First, the old photo of his wedding with Antonia, then a photo of herself with Irene as a baby, followed by recent photos of everyone at the hospital. "It's our story," she explained proudly. "See, it started sad, just like in Grandma's stories, but it's getting happy again. It's like when we fix a car. First we have to understand where it's broken to then fix it right." The simple analogy, coming from that child who had changed his life, affected Ted deeply. Sitting carefully on the edge of her bed, he observed how Lily had connected the dots of their lives through the photographs. "You know, sweetie," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion, "I think you understand more about life than many adults." "It's because I learned with Grandpa the mechanic," she replied simply. "He always said that everything in life is like fixing cars. Sometimes we need to change a part, sometimes we just need to tighten a screw, and sometimes—" She paused dramatically. "Sometimes we just need to give a lot of love and care for the machine to work again." In the hallway, Irene and Josephine listened to the conversation with tears in their eyes. Lily's ability to bring light even to the darkest moments was truly extraordinary. "She has a gift," whispered Josephine to her daughter. "Just like you had when you were little, that way of seeing the good even in the most difficult situations." Irene hugged her mother, remembering how that same ability had kept her strong during the years she had needed to hide. "Sometimes I wonder if I did the right thing, Mom. Running away, leaving you. You did what you needed to do to survive," replied Josephine firmly. "And now look, everything is fitting together in a way that no one could imagine." At that moment, Oliver appeared in the hallway, accompanied by Dr. Bennett and a man no one knew. It was Robert Mendez, 55, the district attorney responsible for the case. "Mr. Ted," called Oliver softly from the door, "can we talk for a moment?" Lily, realizing the seriousness of the situation, took her favorite doll, the one with the small stethoscope, and handed it to Ted. "Here, Uncle Ted, Dr. Maria will take care of your heart while you talk to the men." Ted accepted the doll with an emotional smile, placing it carefully in the pocket of his robe before following Oliver to a small meeting room that the hospital had made available. "Mr. Vasconcelos," began the district attorney after the introductions, "your niece's confession opened a case much larger than we imagined. The corruption scheme in your company was just part of a network involving other construction companies in the region." Ted nodded, feeling the weight of each word. "And what about Antonia?" "We have concrete evidence of premeditation," replied Robert, his voice professional but gentle. "Magnolia didn't act alone. In addition to the mechanic she hired to sabotage the car, we discovered the involvement of other businessmen who were also threatened by your wife's discoveries." Dr. Bennett, who until then had been observing in silence, intervened. "I know it's a lot to process, Mr. Ted, but I need to remind you that you're still recovering. We can't allow stress to compromise your health." "Doctor," Ted turned to the district attorney, ignoring the medical warning, "I want everyone to pay, not for revenge, but for justice. For Antonia, for Irene, for all the lives they put at risk with their greed." "And they will pay," guaranteed Robert. "But there's something else you need to know. We found Antonia's will, made a few days before the accident. In it, she left specific instructions on how to investigate the irregularities in the company if something happened to her." "What kind of instructions?" asked Ted, feeling his heart, the same one that now beat in sync with Lily's, tighten in his chest. "She had created a secret fund," explained Oliver, taking some documents from his folder. "A fund intended to protect and support employees who reported irregularities in the company. Irene was the first and so far only beneficiary, even without knowing it." "How so?" "The monthly deposits that Magnolia used to try to incriminate Mrs. Josephine actually came from that fund. Antonia had programmed everything, predicting that something like this could happen." The revelation hit Ted like lightning. Even after so long, Antonia continued to protect people, continued to fight for what was right. "There's one more thing," continued Oliver, hesitant. "In the will, Antonia talks about a dream you had to create a foundation to help needy children. She left detailed instructions on how to implement this project." At that moment, a child's laugh echoed through the hallway, Lily probably playing with one of the nurses. The sound crossed the walls of the meeting room like a ray of sunshine crosses a closed window. "I think," said Ted slowly, "that I already know exactly how to realize that dream." Returning to the room, he found Lily entertained in a new game. She had transformed her bed into a small school where she taught her toy cars to be good in traffic. "Uncle Ted," she exclaimed when she saw him, "I had an amazing idea. We could teach other children to fix cars, just like my grandfather did. Then everyone would know how to help when someone needed it, just like I helped you that day." Ted sat on her bed, observing that small makeshift teacher. In his mind, the dream he had shared with Antonia began to take on a new form. "You know what, sweetie?" he said, smiling. "I think you just had the best idea in the world." Outside the hospital, the Harmony Creek winter began to show its first signs of softening. And inside that room, while a 6-year-old girl taught toy cars to be good, the last pieces of a long-broken heart finally found their place. What no one knew yet was that Lily's simple idea would be the seed of something much larger, something that would transform not only their lives, but the entire community. But that would be a story for the next chapters of their lives, a story that was just beginning to be written. Lily's idea about teaching other children to fix cars grew like a seed well planted in Ted's mind. During the long hours of recovery in the hospital, he began to develop increasingly elaborate plans, always consulting his little advisor about every detail. "What if we made a really big school?" suggested Lily, her eyes shining as she drew, with crayons on a paper that the nurse had brought, with lots of colorful tools and a bunch of cars to fix. Ted watched in wonder as she created her vision of the project. A colorful building with large windows, a workshop full of tools, and many smiling children learning about mechanics. The drawing might seem simple to any adult, but to him it represented something much bigger, the purity of a dream born from the heart of a child. "You know, Uncle Ted," she said one afternoon while coloring another of her drawings, "Grandpa always said that fixing cars isn't just about changing parts. It's about making people happy when they're sad, because something broke." The wisdom contained in that observation hit Ted deeply. It wasn't just about mechanics, it was about restoring hope, about fixing not only machines, but lives. That same afternoon, Oliver arrived at the hospital with a folder full of documents. The lawyer had spent the last few weeks working tirelessly on the legal details of the project that was beginning to take shape. "I found the perfect place," he announced, spreading plans and photographs on Ted's meal table. "That large lot near Mrs. Josephine's diner, where the old textile factory used to be. The space is ideal and the location couldn't be better." Lily, curious as always, craned her neck to see the photos. "Look, it's close to our house. We'll be able to walk there. And there's more," continued Oliver, taking more papers from his folder. "We discovered that Antonia had bought this land secretly shortly before the accident. She planned to use the space for a social project." The coincidence, if it could be called that, made Ted feel a chill. It was as if Antonia, in some way, had prepared the path for this moment. Irene, who had entered the room during the conversation, approached the plans with professional interest. Her years working with documentation at the construction company had given her a trained eye for projects. "We can adapt the space to have several different areas," she suggested, pointing to different sections of the plan. "One part for theoretical classes, another for practice, and maybe even a space for Mum's diner, so the kids have somewhere to have lunch during classes. And a garden!" exclaimed Lily excitedly, "with lots of colorful flowers, just like there was in Grandpa's backyard." The girls' excitement was contagious. Even Dr. Bennett, who had come in for the afternoon visit, couldn't contain a smile when she saw the enthusiasm of her little patient. "Well," said the doctor after examining the latest tests, "I have good news. If you continue progressing like this, in a week, you two will be able to be discharged." The news was received with a mixture of joy and apprehension. During those weeks in the hospital, the room had become a kind of sanctuary, a safe space where a new family had formed away from the complications of the outside world. "But I'll still be able to see Uncle Ted every day, right?" asked Lily, a hint of concern in her voice. "Every day," guaranteed Ted, holding her little hand. "In fact, I have a surprise for you and your family." He signaled to Clarice, who was waiting in the hallway. The housekeeper entered carrying a small model that had been prepared following Lily's drawings. It was a detailed reproduction of the future teaching center, with colored miniatures and even small cars in the parking lot. "The House of the Mechanical Heart," read Lily, the name written on the facade of the model, her words coming out slowly as she practiced her newly learned reading. "What a pretty name! You're the one who inspired it," explained Ted, "because you were the one who first noticed that cars have a heart, remember? That rainy afternoon?" Josephine, who was watching everything from her chair in the corner of the room, couldn't hold back the tears. It was extraordinary how that seemingly casual encounter had changed so many lives. "And there's more," continued Ted, making an effort to control his own emotion. "In the land next to the school, there's a big house that isn't being used. I thought, well, if you want, it could be yours." The silence that followed was broken by the sound of the door opening. It was the district attorney, Robert, accompanied by 2 police officers. "Sorry to interrupt," he said softly, "but I thought you'd like to know. Magnolia has just been formally indicted. She and the others involved won't be able to hurt anyone anymore." The news hung in the air for a moment, like a page turning in a book. It was the closing of a painful chapter and the beginning of something new. "Uncle Ted," called Lily, her voice small but firm, "we could do something special at the school. A place where people could tell their sad stories and learn to fix them, just like we did." The suggestion, coming from that child who had helped fix so many broken hearts, made everyone reflect. It wasn't just a mechanic school they were building. It was a space of healing, of transformation, of second chances. And you know what else? She continued, her eyes shining with that unique wisdom that only children possess. We could have a wall full of photos, just like this album here, to show that all stories, even the saddest ones, can have a happy ending. At that moment, as if the universe wanted to confirm Lily's words, a ray of sunshine entered the hospital window, creating a rainbow on the white walls through the crystal prism that a nurse had hung days before. "Look!" exclaimed Lily, pointing to the colors dancing on the wall. "It's just like the day we met. First the rain, then the rainbow." Ted looked at that scene, the colorful model, the scattered drawings, Lily's radiant face, the emotional expressions of everyone around, and felt, for the first time in a long time, that he was exactly where he should be. What no one noticed at that moment was Clarice, discreetly placing a small photo of Antonia on the model, smiling her gentle smile as if blessing everything that was to come. It was a small but significant detail, a reminder that sometimes angels work in mysterious ways, using even a broken Ferrari on a rainy afternoon to create miracles. The day of hospital discharge dawned with a special golden light in Harmony Creek. After almost a month of hospitalization, Lily and Ted were finally ready to go home. Dr. Bennett made her last recommendations, while the nursing staff said an emotional goodbye to their most beloved patients. "Remembering," emphasized the doctor, "no physical exertion in the next few weeks, and the medications need to be taken rigorously at the scheduled times." "You can leave it to me, doctor," guaranteed Lily, holding her toy stethoscope. "I'm going to take care of Uncle Ted properly, just like he took care of me." The statement drew smiles from everyone present. During those weeks of recovery, the bond between the two had strengthened in a way that went beyond the physical connection created by the surgery. It was as if their souls had also intertwined, creating a unique harmony that surprised even the most experienced doctors. Mr. Ted called one of the oldest nurses, Mrs. Carmam, 64. "In 30 years of profession, I've never seen anything like it. It's as if you two were handpicked by fate to meet." While they packed the last things in the room, Lily insisted on supervising everything, ensuring that none of her drawings were forgotten. The walls, once white and impersonal, had been transformed into a colorful gallery of her creations, each one telling a piece of the story they had lived there. "Look, Uncle Ted," she exclaimed, pointing to one of the drawings. "This one was from the day our hearts became friends. See, I drew 2 drum hearts, just like you said." Ted took the drawing carefully, observing the childish strokes that portrayed 2 red hearts, united by something that looked like a colorful bridge. It was impressive how Lily managed to translate such complex concepts into such simple and meaningful images. In the hallway, Irene and Josephine talked to Oliver about the preparations for the move to the new house. The lawyer had taken care of all the legal details, and the renovation of the property was almost complete. "You need to see how the library turned out," he commented, showing photos on his cell phone. "We transformed that old hall into a welcoming space with shelves up to the ceiling. There's even a special corner for Lily to study." "And the garden?" asked Josephine, remembering her granddaughter's specific request. "Ah, that's a surprise," smiled Oliver mysteriously. "Let's just say that Clarice outdid herself in the landscaping project." Outside the hospital, a small crowd was forming. They were old customers from the diner, neighbors, employees of the construction company, all wanting to welcome their local heroes, as the city newspaper had dubbed them. Among them was Mr. Jenkins, 72, an old mechanic from the neighborhood, who had known Lily's grandfather. He carried a small package in his calloused hands. "It's for the little one," he explained when Irene approached. "It belonged to my friend, her mother's father. He would want her to have it." When Lily opened the package, her eyes filled with tears of joy. It was her grandfather's old toolbox, each piece carefully cleaned and polished. "Now you can teach other children right," smiled Mr. Jenkins, "just like your grandfather did." The departure from the hospital was a moment of intense emotion. Ted had insisted on using his old red Ferrari, the same one that had broken down that fateful afternoon. The car was impeccably cleaned and decorated with small white ribbons. "See?" joked Lily as she was helped into the back seat. "Now it's happy because it has 2 mechanics to take care of it." The journey to the new house was like a small parade. People came out into the streets to wave, some holding "Welcome Home" signs. At Josephine's diner, now managed by former customers who had become friends, a huge banner announced, "Welcome home, our little mechanic angels." But the biggest surprise awaited them upon arriving at their destination. The land of the old factory had been completely transformed. In place of the abandoned building stood a modern and welcoming structure, with large windows and walls in soft shades of blue and green. "The House of the Mechanical Heart," read Lily aloud the sign on the facade, exactly as in her model. Next door, the house that would be the new home of Lily, Irene, and Josephine was unrecognizable. The garden that Clarice had planned was a spectacle of colors and aromas, with flower beds arranged in a way to create a path to the entrance. "But the biggest surprise is inside," announced Clarice, guiding the group through the house. Upon opening the door, they were faced with a space that seemed to have come directly from Lily's drawings. The living room had walls in soft tones, decorated with empty frames waiting to be filled with new memories. The kitchen was spacious and welcoming, with a special space for Josephine to make her pies. "And this," said Ted, opening a last door, "is your special corner, sweetie." It was a workshop room perfectly adapted for a little mechanic in training. One of the walls was entirely covered by a shelf of colorful tools, all in a size suitable for children's hands. In the center, a low workbench had several projects started, small disassembled engines, organized parts, all waiting for Lily's skilled hands. "Uncle." "Ted!" she exclaimed, running to hug his legs as she had on the first day. "It's just like I dreamed. And there's even more," he smiled, pointing to a side door that opened to a covered passage. "This passage connects directly with the school. That way you can go give your classes without having to go out on the street." "My classes?" she asked, confused. "Of course," replied Ted, kneeling carefully to be at her height. "Who better to teach other children about mechanical hearts than you?" And at that moment, observing Lily's illuminated face, Ted had a certainty that warmed his heart, the same one that now beat in sync with hers. Antonia had been right in her last letter. Fate really had its own plans, and sometimes they were more perfect than anything we could imagine. Outside, the Harmony Creek sun began to set, painting the sky with the same colors that Lily loved to use in her drawings. It was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, a story that promised to be even more beautiful than the previous one. What no one knew yet was that that same night, while everyone slept, Lily would make a new drawing. In it, a red Ferrari carried not only people, but dreams, hopes, and repaired hearts. And in the sky of the drawing, an angel with Antonia's face smiled, blessing that improbable family that fate had united on a rainy afternoon in March. 6 months had passed since that afternoon when Lily and Ted left the hospital. The House of the Mechanical Heart had transformed into the most special place in Harmony Creek, a true center of transformation of lives that went far beyond the teaching of mechanics. On a sunny spring morning, while the flowers in the garden, planned by Clarice, displayed their most vibrant colors, Lily was in her first official class as assistant teacher. Wearing blue overalls specially made for her, with her name embroidered on the pocket and a small red heart on the lapel, she helped Mr. Jenkins explain to a group of children the mysteries of an old car's engine. "See," She said with the adorable seriousness of her now 7 years just completed, "Each part has its special place, just like our heart has a special place in our chest. And when something isn't working right, we fix it with love." The children answered in chorus, repeating the motto that Lily had created and that was now painted in large letters on the main wall of the workshop. From his office on the second floor, Ted watched the scene through the panoramic window. His heart, the one that now beat in sync with that of his little savior, overflowing with emotion. The transformation in his life in recent months had been far beyond the physical. The construction company, now completely restructured, operated under new principles. Each project needed to go through a rigorous approval process that included not only technical aspects, but also social impacts. And more importantly, a significant portion of the profits was directed to the House of the Mechanical Heart and its social programs. "Mr. Ted," called Irene from the door, interrupting his thoughts. She now held the position of administrative director of the project, using her management experience to ensure that everything worked perfectly. "The journalists have arrived for the special report." It was an important day. The House of the Mechanical Heart had been selected as a model of an innovative social project, and a reporting team was there to document its story. But it wasn't just any report. It was a special about projects that transformed lives, presented by a national television network. In the central courtyard, where before there was only abandoned concrete, now there was a circular garden with colorful benches. In the center, a heart-shaped fountain, Lily's personal project, gushed crystalline water. It was there that families gathered, that stories were shared, that lives were transformed. "Mrs. Josephine," called the reporter, a middle-aged woman with gentle eyes, "can you tell us how it all started?" Josephine, who now managed not only her original diner, but also the school's cafe, smiled as she adjusted her impeccably clean apron. "It started with a rain, a broken Ferrari, and a little girl who knew that all hearts, even the mechanical ones, need love to work right." The film crew captured images of the different areas of the project. The main workshop, where children and teenagers learned basic mechanics. The library, now filled with technical books and inspiring stories. The psychological support room, where people could share their pain and find paths to healing. "And here," explained Lily, guiding the reporter with the confidence of a little hostess, "is our wall of repaired stories." It was a huge mural covered with photographs and short texts. Each image told a story of transformation: the ex-convict who found a new life as a mechanic, the single mother who learned a profession to support her children, the teenager who traded the streets for the workshop. In the center of the mural, in a special frame, was the photo of the rainy day when it all started. Lily, drenched, smiling next to Ted's red Ferrari. Next to it, a recent photo showed the two together, smiling, their hearts beating as one. "Mr. Vasconcelos," asked the reporter, "when did you decide to transform a personal tragedy into something so meaningful? For the community?" Ted looked at Lily, who had run to hold his hand before replying, "Actually, I didn't decide. It was this little mechanic here who taught me that sometimes we need to let our heart break completely so that it can be fixed in the right way." At that moment, as if the universe wanted to confirm his words, the school bell rang, a special bell made with parts of old cars, which produced a unique, almost musical sound. It was time for the most special class of the day, the moment when the children gathered to learn not only about engines, but about empathy, love, and overcoming. "Uncle Ted," called Lily excitedly, "today is the day to tell the story of the red Ferrari to the new students." It was a tradition that had started spontaneously. Each new group of students heard the story of how a 6-year-old girl had taught a bitter businessman that all hearts, even the most broken, could be fixed with love and patience. As they walked to the auditorium, decorated with engines transformed into works of art and old tools arranged as sculptures, Oliver approached Ted discreetly. "The last documents have arrived," he whispered. "The judge approved everything. Now it's official." Ted felt his heart, the one that beat in sync with Lily's, race with emotion. After months of process, he had finally obtained shared custody of Lily along with Irene. Not that he needed a piece of paper to confirm what everyone already knew. They were a family, united by something much stronger than blood ties. On the stage of the auditorium, Lily took her special microphone, decorated with small, colored screwdrivers, and began to tell the story that everyone already knew, but never tired of hearing. It was a rainy afternoon in Harmony Creek, when a very beautiful red Ferrari stopped working in front of a small diner. As she narrated, with all the details that her childhood memory had kept, Ted observed the attentive faces in the audience. There were people of all ages, all social classes, all united by the same purpose, to learn that love has the power to fix anything. In the last row, Clarice discreetly wiped away a tear while holding an envelope. Inside it was a letter that Antonia had written, recently found among old documents. A letter that began with the words, "To be delivered when love finds its way." Back to Ted's heart. But that letter, Clarice decided, could wait a little longer. That moment, with Lily telling her story, with smiles on the faces of all those present, with the distant sound of the heart-shaped fountain in the garden, was too perfect to be interrupted. Outside, the red Ferrari was parked in the same place, where it had stopped that rainy afternoon 6 months ago. Now it was more than a luxury car. It was a symbol of how fate sometimes uses the most unexpected means to fix broken hearts. And on the wall of the workshop, a new drawing by Lily showed something that only a child's eyes could see. A giant heart, half mechanical and half human, with a small note written in her childish handwriting. "Sometimes we need to let a mechanic, angel, fix our heart so it can beat in the right rhythm again." The bell rang once more, its sound echoing through the city of Harmony Creek, announcing not only the end of another day at the House of the Mechanical Heart, but also the beginning of thousands of new stories that were still to come. Stories of broken hearts that, with love, patience, and perhaps a little bit of childlike wisdom, would learn to beat again in the right rhythm of happiness.